It's a big day for the channel and 40k fans in general, because now we've got a new edition of 40k confirmed and inbound from Games Workshop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where I've been very pleased to see that there's just been a leaked PDF document that's given a whole load of FAQs as to the new edition of 40k that's shortly to be announced in the big Twitch live stream this afternoon. It's made me even more excited to see that Twitch stream now. I'm sure we're going to see some epic new models, particularly Necrons if these FAQs are to be believed, and it sounds like a 40k edition that's going to please most people in my opinion, and these FAQs go quite a long way to quashing some of the concerns that people had, which I did think were fairly baseless, things like all the codex being outdated and the Psychic Awakening books not being able to be used. They all say they very much can, so that's very good for the game. First of all, I think it's interesting to see they've got a nice new logo for Warhammer 40k, which is the one that you can see on the screen here, very much keeping with the same sort of Aquila type theme, but going for a slightly new style on it. Definitely seems to speak a bit more of a military vibe than the last one to me. Not the biggest changes in the world, and I'm sure people will get well used to it in time. So I thought we'd quickly go through some of these FAQs from the leaked document that's been posted on the internet, although it's subsequently been taken down because someone in Games Workshop must have made some sort of error with uploading it. The first question they've asked is, why have you done a new edition of the game? They talk a little bit about 8th edition being a new built edition from the ground up, and they've had 3 years of player experience and feedback to try and make adjustments to it. Frankly, from the core rules of 8th edition, a lot has changed since it initially came out, all through the chapter approved match play updates and things. And to be honest, even if they didn't add anything new into the game, which I'm sure they will to be honest, just having everything consolidated in one handy book would be kind of more handy than having to consult chapter approved for half the rules, the standard book for some other rules, and a whole bunch of FAQs on top of that. I'm sure we will be getting more FAQs at some stage, knowing Games Workshop, but having that all reset down to one book to start with will at least reduce the amount of bookkeeping. The core rules of the game will still be very much free apparently, although again you would have to pay for the big rule book just like in this edition, so not much changing there. No mentioning of a digital rule set either, which was one thing that had been speculated. They confirmed that all the codexes and Psychic Awakening books will be still in use, although apparently the Forge World Index books will be changing and being updated relatively soon into the edition. They're saying soon after the release, whenever that might be, which I think is quite good. I was honestly a bit sceptical as to how soon the Forge World books will be getting out. I know they had already released them, but it struck me as a bit more of a back burner type project, and I honestly wasn't entirely sure whether they'd get round to making them till next year or something, so it's glad to see that the Forge World indexes will be being updated, and for me that's a bit of a positive. As for me, really a lot of them aren't very well balanced at all. Most of them are nerfed into obsolescence, and were very much written with the very start of 8th edition in mind, rather than what it's become, so it'd be good to have some updates on those. They make a few allusions to changes that they're making, including saying that loads of new rules have changed, looking at every phase in the game, as well as missions, points and stratagems. They haven't said anything specific in this FAQ update, but I'm sure they'll be teasing it and keeping releases coming over the next few months. They say that the setting and lore will be advancing, but not really quite how, other than it will be big and dramatic. And they're mentioning that there will be new models, including Necrons in particular, are going to be in for a good year. This does make me wonder if that rumour that the Necrons vs Space Marines box set that might be coming out as the starter set could have some credence. Who knows, maybe this will be very old news in 2 hours time when they actually do the official release. They might show it to us. I'm honestly really looking forward to this preview now. While they have said that the codexes aren't going away, they're basically saying that the release cycle is starting anew for new and updated rules for each faction. So we will be getting updated rules for each race in turn. I think that this has a positive and a negative side really. On the positive side, it does mean that each faction will actually get updated, and when they redo a codex it does mean that they have the opportunity to pull things in from minor supplements, whether they're Vigilus or Psychic Awakening, all into one book, and maybe hopefully slightly reduce the rules bloat of the game. I think it is also important to promise that each faction will be supported in a new edition, because it's not much fun to be collecting an army that sees absolutely no love whatsoever throughout a whole edition, and just vaguely hoping for things in the future that might never come. I imagine that ones that were coming out right at the start of 8th edition, things like Craftworld Eldar, Guard and Grey Knights, might be some of the ones that see the first updates, but I guess we really can't tell. It'd be interesting to see what comes of that. Interestingly enough, it sounds like there's also going to be a big points reshuffle at the same time as the new edition, which depending on when it actually winds up coming out, could be interestingly and slightly close to the previous Munitorium handbook which came out just in December. I suspect with the whole virus lockdown situation, it might be pushing back this release quite a long way, and naturally I'd be very surprised if we get 9th edition before we wound up getting the end of the Psychic Awakening series, and they've still got 3 of those books to release. Nevertheless, I'm generally a fan of points updates and rebalances. It means that they shake the game up, they make things more interesting, the strongest units in the game that auto-includes get a little bit brought back in check, and the weakest units in the game usually get a bit of a buff, maybe becoming relevant again. I think the new edition is a perfect time to do this, because you can have all the points in one place again temporarily at least, reducing the need for extra books and extra rules bloat. They're also talking about something called Crusade, which apparently is a narrative play system that they haven't really given too many details about, other than it will allow you to interact with your Warhammer 40K collection in a deeper, more meaningful way. I am a little bit skeptical about any big ideas for narrative play like this, as they do tend to be only adopted by certain parts of the community rather than the entire community, depending on what's happening in your local area. It might be a bit like what they call battle zones at the start of 8th edition, which had different rules depending on what sort of narrative play that you were playing in. I remember thinking they were an interesting idea, but I didn't see anyone actually using them in any game that I played throughout all of 8th edition. It'd be interesting to see what they do come out with though, but I'll have to remain to be sold on it. They've also got a new website, which is warhammer40,000.com. At the moment it mainly just seems to be getting into 8th edition sort of content, but they do mention that there's going to be a new cinematic trailer for Warhammer 40k coming out, and frankly I suspect they're going to be leading with that in these big reveals they do in an hour or so's time. They've also confirmed that the rules will be updated through chapter approved in the normal way, but I guess depending on when this edition comes out, they will probably leave it a good few months before trying to chapter approved anything. I guess this will very much remain the same system as previously. There's a few other bits and bobs, such as why you're doing this so soon after Psychic Awakening, which is saying that it's been building up to some major shifts in the 40k universe, with the new edition seeing them come to a head, and all the Psychic Awakening books are fully compatible with the new edition. They're confirming that Kill Team is not going anywhere and it's still going to be the same game, although as expected some of the new features and new models might make the jump over to Kill Team bit by bit, to further flesh out that particular parallel universe of rules. As with the current rules, they'll still be giving away that very slimline type core rules thing for free, which you can download or will probably be available in the box sets as previous, although it's not really quite enough to play full proper games of 40k, so I suspect some new rule books will be required. They say that there's multiple ways to get the new copy of the Warhammer 40k rulebook, which I'm sincerely hoping this will be in a reasonably priced box set such as Dark Imperium. As to me, that seemed like a very good way of getting people into the game at a much lower price point than you'd usually have to fork out for. Talking of Dark Imperium and a new box game, they said that it will be a new box game for the start of the hobby, and I'm sure that they'll be showing that off well before it actually comes out, maybe in this coming preview this afternoon, and I'll most certainly be talking about it if they do. It does mean that one important note is that Dark Imperium will be going away, and to be honest, as it's such a fantastic deal for getting your hands on some of the Primaris Marines or Death Guard, if you were thinking about picking that one up, then it's not a bad shout before it goes. I strongly suspect that we'll never see quite as many of those characters discounted quite so heavily again, although admittedly at the moment getting the rulebook included isn't really that big a deal, seeing as we now know that it's going to be shortly to be invalidated. So basically if you want quite cheap things like Primaris Ancients or Gravis Captains or Lieutenants and things, or of course a lot of the Nurgle characters, then it might still be a decent pickup. Otherwise No Fear might be a better shout to actually get your hands on the cheaper Primaris units such as Inceptors, Hellblasters and Intercessors. They haven't actually said whether No Fear is going to be going away or not. It does seem to be very much in the same vein as Dark Imperium, so it wouldn't surprise me. But who knows, maybe they'll keep it on. I certainly hope they do, as it's a fantastic value option. Finally, they've just clarified that non-Primaris Space Marines are still very much not going anywhere. I'd honestly be surprised if they get retired in the next edition as well. The range is just absolutely massive, and I'm sure Games Workshop isn't in any rush to retire perfectly decent plastic kits. Finally, the thorny question is to when this is actually coming out, and they say really soon. We're a few weeks off just yet, but we want to give you a bit of a heads up so you could get ready, and because we're too excited to keep the news to ourselves any longer. We'll let you know when we have more news on an exact release date. It does make me wonder whether this initial preview was supposed to happen at Adepticon, or whether it was supposed to happen at another big reveal session in May, as it is now. And it might have been part of the reason that the Adepticon-style Warhammer 40k previews just felt a little bit thin on the ground compared with the Age of Sigmar and various other specialist game stuff. I can see why they wouldn't want to tell people about 9th edition when they had absolutely no idea when they were going to be able to release it, as that wouldn't be great what with the virus situation. But now that releases are slowly starting to trickle back, it looks like they can be relatively assured of their schedule, and I'm sure we'll know nearer the time. If I'd had to make a complete random estimate myself, I put my money on around about 2 months after this preview, which would put it somewhere like end of July, start of August time, but then I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little longer than that, just what with the virus slowing everything down and maybe disrupting their release cycle. In any case, I'm absolutely pumped for this preview that's going to be happening on the Twitch site now. Looking forward to watching that, and I'll certainly be doing a video afterwards to discuss anything that they happen to have leaked there. Just an inkling that we might be getting a whole ton of very snazzy new Necron models, and if they are talking about 9th, I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing some Space Marines that they're fighting in a new starter box set, but I guess we'll see. So let me know your thoughts and ideas. Personally, I think this is exactly what I'd hoped for in a release of 9th edition. Consolidated rules, some exciting developments and new mechanics, a brand new starter box, and the promise of every faction being supported without just blankly wiping the slate clean and making everyone's publications redundant overnight. Really looking forward to seeing more from this. I'm sure there'll be loads more videos to make about the coming edition over the next few months. So if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and we'll have plenty more on the way. And feel free to check back in a bit for my proper roundup of the 40k reveals from Games Workshop themselves. I absolutely can't wait to see what they've got for us.